Hello students, this is Professor McDonald. This will be some professor comments relative to Chapter 7, Interviewing and Interrogation. Another very important chapter. I can tell you from experience that your ability to be an effective investigator in many cases hinges on your ability to obtain information. And how do you obtain information? You interview witnesses, you interrogate suspects. This is a learned behavior. You'll get trained in this depending on what agency that you go to work for. But I can promise you this is something, a skill that you consistently and constantly must strive to improve. I spent a lot of time trying to hone my skills in doing effective interviewing and using effective techniques, and it served me very well in my career. Along with others that I worked with. People that are unable to socially interact with other individuals, to be able to obtain and aren't able to obtain information that they vitally need to solve cases are normally not very productive investigators in criminal investigation. So this is one one area that I do want you, when you get into the field, to particularly try to strive at. The good thing is there is excellent training on how to do interviews, and I was very fortunate. I was also, because I was effective at the skill, I was able to attend advanced interview and interrogation school, and during those times I learned additional techniques, some of them which we will talk about, that you will read about in the text this week. So just as a precursor to what we're going to talk about, I want you to make sure that when you get in the field, this is one area that you try to be very effective at and work hard to improve. Now, the book defines what an interview is. It's simply an interview is a person-to-person conversation engaged in obtaining information about a crime or its circumstances. You will conduct I can promise you will conduct interviews every day. Interviews are conducted in private and only begin after the investigator has established a rapport with the person to be interviewed. If you are unable to establish this rapport, most people will be standoffish from you, and you'll not be able to get the information that you need. During the interview, the investigator must assess the potential witness's competency and credibility. So not only do you have to ask the right questions, but you have to be a very good listener in particular and let them talk. And you also have to be able to observe their behavior, even their physical demeanor, because 65% of communication, as our textbook says, is nonverbal. And I'm a firm believer in that. And you'll see what I mean as you get further into the readings. When conducting interviews, privacy is very important. 80% of police interviews are informal, and they occur outside an office setting. You could be out on the street responding to a crime, and you segregate your witnesses. You've already learned that in our literature in the prior chapters, and you get one-on-one with a witness and you obtain the information that you need, but you want to make this as private as possible. Number one, people aren't comfortable talking in front of other people, and number two, you don't want to compromise your investigation, because you've already learned if you try to interview 2 or 3 people and ask them the same question and interview them as a group, you're going to have a mess on your hands, because other people will influence what other people recall, and as a result you'll get bad information and you'll start off on the wrong foot, especially if you're responding to a crime. So again, that term, reverse transference, you don't want a witness to overhear what other witnesses are discussing. You're trying to get to the truth. Never forget that. You're trying to get to the truth, and the truth is more readily available when you use proper techniques in gathering information. You want to be able to build a good rapport with the people you're talking to. You don't talk down to them. You don't scream at them. You don't yell at them. People will clam up. I can promise you that. I've seen investigators that act like that. They don't last very long. You want to be able to observe individuals as to their demeanor. Some cases you want to be very sympathetic and empathetic. They may have just witnessed a crime or been the victim of a crime. And in some cases have gone through the most traumatic event in their life. And so you need to be able to handle that when you're talking to these folks and take that into account. Competency and credibility, very, very important. How old is the person? Obviously, if you're interviewing minors or juveniles, you have to take that into account. You need to assess the intelligence of a person. You might find that you're talking to somebody that has some behavioral issues or even some mental capacity issues, and you have to take that into account, especially relative to credibility. Their mental state, are they intoxicated? You talk to somebody that's drunk or under the influence of alcohol, whatever they tell you, you can't be sure it's the truth. And it is surely not, if you try to introduce an interrogation, the results of an interrogation in a court of law, when you interrogated somebody that was under the influence of alcohol or drugs, I promise you it's not going to be admissible as evidence. You have to place any biases. We all have biases and prejudices, but your focus is to find the truth. So you have to place those things behind you. Think about weather conditions. There's a lot of different things you have to think about when you're doing an interview. And just a real quick tip, never assume somebody can read and write. Always, especially if you're taking a statement or if you're giving somebody the Miranda rights, there are people that you could encounter that are illiterate, and they'll never tell you that. So that's just a little tip for your information. Interviews are normally a 4-step process. You want to start with open-ended questions, open-ended being, hey, what happened? Not questions that would be responded to with a yes or no. Tell me what happened. Let them explain to you what happened in their own words. And during this time, you're not taking notes, especially at the start of an interview. You're listening. You're trying to get the story as to what occurred. You're trying to assess the individual relative to their competency and their credibility. Once you've gotten let's say the story for the first time, then you have them repeat it. Why do that? Because you want to see if, again, we're establishing credibility. Have you ever noticed that when people tell the truth, if they tell the story again, they tell the exact story? But when people are lying, if they tell the story a couple of times, they can't keep up with what they said before. So that's why it's important to do that. Then you can take notes during that second stage. You want to, when you're finished hearing the story for the second time, then you want to review your notes with the witness to make sure that you've recorded the information properly. And then always ask them if there's anything else they want to provide. Depending on the circumstances, if it's a street interview, that might be it. You give them your business card and you'll write your report up. If you're interviewing somebody in a more formal setting, it could be that you take a written statement from that individual at that point. Again, an important skill, looking for an important skill to have, again, is being a very good listener, because there's a lot of nonverbal, observable behavior that will help you, again, make a determination of whether somebody's being truthful or not. And that's very important. And again, let them talk and then evaluate. There's some interesting things about deception in the textbook. Physical signs of deception. You probably have heard about these things, but as you become more adept at doing interviews, you want to train yourself to observe these physical signs of deception. It could be a comfort issue. If you see somebody moving around in the chair, they appear to be very nervous. If they're not being truthful, there are certain things they can exhibit. If they seem to be stuttering, if they seem to be just talking really extremely fast, I've seen that happen. And I'm not talking about when they're just nervous. But if they seem to be tripping over their own words, the story when they tell it the second time, it doesn't match out. It doesn't match up with the first time. And a lot of liars, for the most part, do not emphasize with nonverbal behavioral. Some of them do. People that are being untruthful, they don't think about how they're presenting the lie. That's why sometimes you don't see that nonverbal behavior as much. They're very concerned about making sure they're keeping the story straight that they've created in their own mind. And then there's other things they talk about. Synchrony, where somebody will be saying, I didn't do it, while they're nodding their head up and down. Just little things that you'll pick up and that you'll be trained to pick up during your training, your law enforcement training. I think an intriguing thing, and I've included a film in this week's readings to support this week's reading, is on neurolinguistic eye movement. And I'm not going to go through the entire thing, but there's been studies done as to how individuals react when they're recalling information that they know, which would be the truth, or if they're trying to make up information, or they're trying to recall something they don't know. If you watch the way their eyes move, and I don't want to give it away in this tape, but when you watch those tapes and you do the reading, that may be just another tool that can assist you in determining whether a person is being truthful or not. What our textbook talks about is about 90% of the population will move their eyes to the left when they are recalling something that they actually experienced. Interesting. So you can do that on yourself or even on somebody that you know. The remaining 10% of the population who do not respond in this manner are typically left-handed people who simply reverse the movements. So this might be something that you want to be able to establish early in an interview if it's a really important interview, whether the person's left-handed or right-handed. A lot of times when you take a personal history from an individual, that might be a good question to ask if you know that the interview is going to be very important. But again, this is not foolproof. As the book says, neurolinguistic eye movement may be the same for both right and left-handed people. It takes a lot of skill to be able to pick up on this, and when you get training in advanced interrogation techniques, these are things that you work on. But if you're doing a lot of interviews and a lot of interrogations, then these are the kind of skills that you can build, and it's almost like muscle memory. You'll pick up on this when you're interviewing the person at the same time. So if we're saying if they are moving their eyes to the left when they're recalling something that they actually experienced, that means they're probably being truthful. This is something I experienced. But if they look to the right, now they're trying to create something, and you can do that. Ask yourself something. Ask one of your friends. Sit down with them and say, hey, listen, if you were going to build your perfect house, what would it look like? Well, this is not something they recall. This is something they have to create. So it'd be interesting to see if their eyes go to the right when they're thinking about creating something in their mind that's not from recall. So just some tips. Make sure you watch those films. They're pretty interesting. Polygraph testing is something I've had a lot of experience with. I actually have taken a polygraph when I was being relative to national security. Depending on the jobs that you're in, or even if a job you apply for, it might require a polygraph examination. And if you work in certain jobs where you have access to top secret and high level information, you may be required to take a national security polygraph exam. That's the one that I took. They ask you questions like, did anybody from a foreign country ask you to bid on this job or to apply for this job? Mostly national security questions. But from a criminal investigative standpoint, we use polygraphs for different reasons. And sometimes we use them to eliminate witnesses. Sometimes we use them with a witness that hasn't admitted to a crime, and you're just trying to see if maybe there's another tool that you can use to try to see if that individual will come clean on an investigation that you're working on. So I have used these in embezzlement cases, and I've had some success. The polygraph test itself is not admissible in court. However, if a person takes a polygraph, they're advised of their rights. It's voluntary. They don't have to take it. But during that polygraph process, if they confess to the crime, that is admissible. The confession is admissible. The actual testing and the method of testing is not admissible in court. And what do they test? They look at the pneumograph, the galvanograph, and the cardiograph. So what are we talking about? We're talking about our breathing. We're talking about our skin reaction and our heart rate. These are certain things that are measured using the polygraph device, and that assist the operator in making a determination as to whether or not the individual is being truthful or not. Again, you can't be forced to take one. It's strictly voluntary. The book talks about hypnosis. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. I've never used it, and I never worked on a case or was around a case where we actually used a hypnotist, but I'm not saying that it's not something that has been done, because I know they have cases where hypnosis was used. And I can imagine if you were working a brutal homicide case and you had absolutely no leads, and you're reaching for anything that can help you solve this case, then I wouldn't be averse to trying something like this to see if that would get the case moving forward on the right path. Cognitive interviewing is an investigative technique used to enhance a witness's ability to recall events. And there are certain techniques that you could use to help witnesses, to assist them in recalling events truthfully, changing the sequence of questions. The book describes that at great length. I'm not going to repeat that. An interrogation is defined as the adversarial questioning of a suspect with the goal of soliciting admission or confession of guilt. Now, it's important to understand that prosecutors love confessions. They do build your case. They do strengthen your case, and you can't convict a person on a confession alone. You still have to have evidence that shows that that satisfies the elements of the crime, or a confession goes a long ways, especially in cases where guilty pleas result. That said, you want to make sure that you conduct confessions lawfully. You follow the procedures that have been established by the courts, and if you do that, and you do get a confession, it'll be admissible in court. I had a lot of confessions. I was able to obtain many confessions through the years, and I never had a confession thrown out in a suppression hearing. And that's because I followed the rules and I followed the training that I was provided by the agencies that I work for. Now, interrogation, when you interrogate somebody, that means they're in custody and they're being asked questions about a crime. Obviously, Miranda rights are required at that time, and if a person does waive their rights and agrees to ask questions, they still have the right to terminate the interrogation at any time. So you make sure that you abide by the guidelines provided by the Miranda decision. And again, remember, interrogation means that the person is in custody. There are some important cases that I want you to be familiar with. So when you, Brown versus Mississippi, and that's a case involving the beating of a suspect in order to obtain a confession for murder. Ward v. Texas, questioning an individual. The defendant was arrested and transported out of county more than 100 miles from his home. So make sure you read those cases. I'm not going to go through all of them, but they're all applicable to interrogation. Again, there's some excellent discussion about the Miranda. And make sure, again, the two triggers of Miranda are custody and interrogation itself, the asking of questions. When those two things occur, then a person must be advised of their Miranda rights. Now, when you're just interviewing a witness and they're not in custody and they're not being interrogated, you're just trying to obtain information, well, that's not a Miranda situation. So you don't have to advise everybody all the time of Miranda. Again, the government, the prosecutor is going to have to, he has the burden to prove that let me back up for a second. Miranda is a two-pronged process. You give them the warning, which is, you have the right to remain silent, etc. You can see that in the textbook on page 145. But there's also a waiver portion, and the waiver portion is very important. This is where the person acknowledges that they understand their rights and they're willing to waive their rights at this time and answer questions, without a lawyer present. And in most departments, this is something that you want to get a signature on, especially if it's in a formal setting. If you're out on the street doing an interrogation and you don't have a form for them to sign, well, then it'll be your word against theirs. But just make sure that you get that waiver as well. So you got the warning aspect and then the waiver portion. And these are both important to ensure that a person has legally waived his rights before they give a confession. What good is it to get a confession if you're not able to use it? Now, when you interrogate somebody, this is not something that's done haphazardly. I always learned myself that prior preparation before interrogating somebody is very, very important. You want to make sure you know as much as you can about that person and as much as you can about the crime, because you have to ask questions in your approach to this individual that will hopefully solicit a lawful confession. So it's very important that you do your work and are prepared in advance. You just don't walk in and start asking people questions without that prior preparation. Take it from somebody who's done many interrogations, and that was, I think, the key, and that was because I was trained properly in the proper essentials that an individual needs to obtain a proper lawful confession. And I'll be honest with you, you'd be surprised. Most people, when given the opportunity, will confess to the crime, especially if they're guilty. Now, there's a few oddballs, too, that'll come in and confess to crimes that they didn't commit. That's why we never give away all the details of a crime as criminal investigators. But those are few and far between, and you might not ever run into that. Maybe you will. But people will confess, and people sometimes are surprised at that, but it's been my experience, personal experience, that is true. Now, you get some hardened criminals, they won't even talk to you. And that's understandable as well. When you make that case, you've got to make it with the evidence, and you're not going to have a confession in your back pocket going in to the prosecution. So anyway, there's a lot of key things to think about when you're doing interrogation, and the chapter does a good job. Make sure that you're familiar with that four-step process. Make sure that you can establish an individual's competency, credibility when you're trying to determine their truthfulness. Remember that there's a certain percentage of communication is nonverbal. Remember that 65% figure that I gave you before? You might see that on a test. And remember those triggers. What are the triggers when Miranda is required? Custody and interrogation. If you have any questions, reach out to me. This will be the end of this chapter. Professor comments.